You're tuned into the Writing Community Chat Show, the live streaming YouTube podcast that brings you the stories of authors, screenwriters, and more. Indie or established, this show's for the community, and we invite you to be a part of it. Head to the writingcommunitychatshow.com for more info. The WCCS. Together as one, we get it done.
Hello and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody and welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. It's great to be here as always, and it's great to make it a Friday, but also we're now in December. Chris, I feel like this week, this month and this year is absolutely flown by. How are you doing, and have you felt the same way?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Obviously, the calendars have started for a lot of people. The elf on the shelf, that's become a thing. So probably a few parents tearing the house out with the elves knocking about. But yeah, it's been a very quick year when you stop and think about it. Like, I can still remember some of the very early interviews we had at the start of this year. And yeah, they've flown by. And Harrogate was almost, what was it, 5 months ago now?
It's bonkers, isn't it? Well, I know you've read a lot this year, so, and it's quite early to ask this, but have you got a book that really stands out for you this year yet?
Yeah, I've spoken about it a few times, and it's that Crooked Little Vein book that I read. It was just, it's unlike anything I've ever read before, and it just blew my mind. Just how ballsy it was. It was a brilliant, like, when a story just hits you, and I thought, how much is he actually getting away with here? And he just kept going and going, and it was like a dark exploration of America and the underbelly of America. So I really enjoyed that. I loved, obviously we had American Rapture on the show. That book was brilliant. CJ Lead. Oh no, we've messed that up, mate. I think maybe it was CJ Lead. I think we confused.
Yeah, it was.
Okay. And yeah, American. Yeah, but that Crooked Little Vein for me. If you like your writing a little bit darker, I would definitely recommend that. As my, I've got to be selective of who I recommend that to. I recommended it to one person that I know in work, and other than that, I would not mention it. And I've just mentioned it on the internet now. So.
Yeah. Do you say that because it is so kind of like dark and sort of gritty that you need to be the right kind of reader to enjoy it the way you did? I
don't necessarily. Yeah, you do. Long story short, you do. Because it was a dark read. It opened my eyes, put it that way. But I like the bravery of the author. I like a book when I'm reading one at the minute by what's his name? Nick. He's a famous musician. Nick Cope, I think his name is.
Okay, yeah. Nick Cope. Yeah.
But his book is brilliant. It's The Death of Bunny Monroe, and it's a TV series with Matt Smith, and I love Matt Smith as the Doctor. He was brilliant. Am I messing names up here?
No, Matt Smith was the Doctor. Yeah.
Yeah, he was my favorite Doctor simply because I watched it with my kids, and he was the only one that they would watch. As soon as the Doctors got older, they started to be like, no, I'm not watching this.
You say that, I think they started older and got younger, didn't they?
Yeah, they got a little bit younger, but they won't entertain any of the new series. We tried to watch the first one with that little ET type character, and that freaked me out. So the kids weren't into that either. But hello to Chris and people in the chat. Obviously, we've got a great guest today. Absolutely. Rob Parker is someone that we obviously speak to quite a lot, and he's a huge Bond fan. So getting into today's show is going to be brilliant.
Yeah, I imagine Rob at Harrogate has had a chat with our guest about that once or twice, perhaps, because he's always there having a good chat to people, and we've got a few of his videos to prove that. But yes, hello to you all in the chat. Like Chris said, it's great to see you there. Hope you've had a good week, and if you've read a book this year that stood out, like Chris mentioned, let us know what that was for you. And also, how has your writing week been? And luckily, unmotivatingly for me. I'm trying to find words to make this make sense. Last week I was productive. This week not so much. What about you, Chris? Are you writing this week? How's it been?
No, I've not been writing. I've been reading. Just sort of. I read a quote the other day. Actually, it said, "If you're not writing, you should be reading. If you're not reading, just watch something. Just keep those stories sort of flowing in your mind, and at some point you'll get back to it." And yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let us know in the chat how's what book stands out for you this year, and how's your writing been this week. So while you're doing that and writing away in there, and say hello to each other as well, please do that. I'm going to introduce tonight's guests. I'm going to get them on for a great chat, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy this. So please hang around, put your questions in there, and remember at the end we have a section for questions as well. But if you feel like throwing them in the middle, do that as well. So tonight we welcome an absolute powerhouse of the crime fiction world. He is a Sunday Times best-selling author, a multi-award winner, including the prestigious CWA historical Dagger, and he currently serves as the chair of the UK Crime Writers Association. But perhaps the most exciting part, he has personally been commissioned by the Ian Fleming Estate to continue the legacy of James Bond's very own gadget-master Q in the new Q mystery series. That is a career arc we are absolutely going to talk about tonight. He is the author of the beloved Baby Ganesh Detective Agency series, featuring Inspector Chopra and his elephant Ganesha. I hope I pronounced that right. And the critically acclaimed Malabar House series, which just released its final book, The Edge of Darkness, starring India's first female detective. So please join me in giving a massive warm welcome to tonight's spectacular guest, Vaseem Khan. Hello, Vaseem.
Hello, gents, and hello, everybody else. I tell you what, I love that. I love that preamble chat about the Doctor Who. I grew up with Tom Baker as Doctor Who, and you're right. Yeah, they started off ancient with John Pertwee, and then they got younger and younger, and now they're going in the other direction again. And Chris doesn't like it. I do have to say that we had to decide, because I got completely confused with the two Chris's, and I had to decide what to call you guys, and we decided on Chris Good Cop and Chris Bad Cop, and Chris Who Bad Cop, because he turned up late to the pre-chat as if he just didn't give a shit, and then he's got that SAS hard man look to him. So yeah, he's going to be Chris Bad Cop, and you're going to be Chris Good Cop.
I love it. And I'm sure our chat, the way that the conversations have been in the past, Good Cop, Bad Cop is another addition to our Chris versus Chris sort of saga. Yes, Vaseem, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure. As I mentioned before the show, we've spotted you around Harrogate a few times, but never really had that great chat. And tonight is our opportunity to do that. So thank you. And we hope you're doing well. How's your week been?
Yeah, it's been a good week. Yeah, I got to say, I've been up at 4 a.m. watching England play in the Ashes, because I'm a huge cricket nut. And what that means is that my wife's not awake, so I've got the house to myself. It's very quiet, and I can actually do some writing. Of course, every few minutes I have to shout at the screen because England have done something stupid again. And
yeah,
being a massive England fan, it does drive me balmy when they don't play properly.
I was going to say you worked in India for a long time, and then you're supporting England in cricket. Is that well?
Obviously, I was born in London, grew up here, and I grew up watching cricket in an era where there were like 3 TV channels, right?
Yeah.
So you couldn't watch any other team except England, and I fell in love with the English team, which had David Gower and Ian Botham. So those were my heroes. And so when I went to work in India in my 20s, and it was Sachin Tendulkar, and everybody was mental for cricket. And then when India would play England, I was the lone person in the entire office would stop work just so they could watch cricket, and I was the lone person in the office cheering for England.
Amazing. That is it's such an interesting thing, isn't it? Cricket in between. It's not something I've followed, but I know the passion for it, and within cricket it is enormous, and India is absolutely obsessed with cricket, as is the England community of cricket. So, and from what I understand, I should love it, because from what I understand is when people go to cricket, they just tend to celebrate the entire time they're there.
Yeah, you're talking about the Barmy Army, the notorious England.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's the difference between, because I love football as well, right? I mean, I grew up. I was born just a few hundred yards away from West Ham's old ground. So I grew up as a Hammers supporter, and I play five-a-side still. So, but the difference between the fans is it's chalk and cheese, because cricket fans, they will go to a cricket match, they will drink beer all day long, shout themselves hoarse, and then if their team loses, they'll moan for about 5 minutes, and then they'll go and have a drink with the opposition. Whereas football fans, same thing happens, and they'll get out the nunchuckers and have a good old brawl in the street.
Well, Halo said, what is cricket? Well, imagine two people stood opposite each other with bats, and someone throws a ball really hard at that person, and they have to hit the ball and run between the two people. Not like baseball, it's very different, but kind of the same concept, I suppose.
I mean, it's exactly like baseball. If baseball lasted 5 days, and there still wasn't a result.
Well, interestingly, you said you play five-a-side, and now Chris definitely does that. Bad Cop does that as well. So is there scope here? I'm sure like people like Rob Parker for Harrogate, is there scope there that we get a little five-a-side going at some point during Harrogate?
Well, there was another festival. There is another festival called Bloody Scotland, and up until maybe a year or so ago, they used to have a five-a-side game during the festival. I used to play in that one. Mark Billingham used to be so I played for it was England versus Scotland writers.
Wow.
Mark Billingham was the captain of the England team, and Craig
Robertson?
Craig Robertson, I think, was the captain of the Scottish team. So I played that 3 years in a row, and then they decided that everybody was getting too old and knackered. The risk of injury was they started to take it a bit too seriously. So you're not supposed to slide tackle in five-a-side. Come on.
No, definitely not. But I can imagine that being fun. Brilliant. So it's great, as I said, to have you on. And we're going to play a very quick video, and then we're going to talk about your road to writing. So obviously, you've won multiple awards. You're now the chair of the Crime Writers Association, which is amazing.
Well, I wasn't. Sorry, I should correct you. I was until a couple of months ago, because it's a 2-year gig, and I passed on the chalice, the poison chalice.
Okay, my apologies there, but yes, we will still discuss that amazing journey and the road to writing, which is coming right up. So, Vaseem, do you remember the first spark in your mind and the first light in the fire that was like, writing is something I have to do in my life?
Yeah, I guess I do, because I was in school, and there was a particular English teacher, and we know that bad cop is an English teacher. So is my sister, and he was very, very encouraging. And he used to set us these assignments to write these stories, right? And he'd say, write like 100 words, and then I'd submit like 6,000 pages. But he never said, "What's wrong with you?" So that was the earliest time I started getting into writing. I did hear recently that he may have, I think his life ended tragically. I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it didn't end well. I'm sure it wasn't because of me, but for other reasons. And then
still reading the pages.
And then because I'm having to read all those damn short stories, I finally got to him. And then in my teens, I came across Terry Pratchett's Amazing Discworld series, and I decided I was going to write my first novel, because I thought, this looked really easy, and and so I wrote a comic fantasy a la Pratchett. I finished it when I was 17, and I sent it off to some agents, and then I went to my parents and I said, I'm not going to university because I'm going to be a rich and famous writer, which is probably not the kind of thing you should say to immigrant Asian parents who are, working hard to make sure you get educated and, and do better than they did. Anyway, there was no real problem, because the book was shit and it was duly rejected. And I had to go to university. I became a management consultant. That took me around the world, 10 years in India, some time in China, Middle East, etc. And everywhere I was working, I would keep writing. And I wrote another 7 novels across various genres. I tried to write literary fiction, historical, thrillers. I even tried to write a sort of an erotic thriller. And my missus keeps saying, you clearly didn't know what you were doing, because none of this looks remotely true to life. So I wrote all of those books, and every time I would finish one, I would send it to about 25 or 30 agents in the UK. And back then you couldn't email. So I had to literally print these things out, sample
Wow.
chapters and everything, and mail them from India,
Mm.
and then hope for the best. And I tell you what, when you collect all that number of rejections over that many years, I've probably got over 100 rejection letters. I mean, it's like being kicked in the bollocks repeatedly every few years. And I know there will be people on this podcast who will appreciate and understand that experience. And it is really tough when you've spent 3 years writing something that you really believe in and you think this is the one that's going to crack it for me. And then it gets roundly rejected, and you have to dust yourself up, pick yourself up off the floor. But that's the beauty of this industry, right? Because one idea dies, and then, if you love books and you love the idea of being a writer, sooner or later another idea will come along to you. I think Terry Pratchett, who I've already mentioned, and it's a great hero of mine, he captured it best. He wrote somewhere that there are ideas constantly moving through the cosmos, waiting for the right head to fall into. And I think I love that image, that there are sort of ideas, and there might be one that bounces into my head, and that's the right one.
That's nice. I'm reading Stephen King's On Writing memoir at the moment.
Yeah,
and he mentions how similar story, like he had to send the manuscripts away all the time and got all these rejections, and he actually had a nail in the wall where he put these hundreds of rejections up there, and he had to change the nail to something bigger because that's how many he kept getting. And we know how his career worked out, so it's those people out there that get 1 or 2 rejections and then think, this is not for me. They gave up that dream. It wasn't the rejection that did it. It was that commitment to almost like the arrogance to keep going because you believe that's going to happen.
Absolutely. Well, Stephen King's clearly got a more understanding wife than I have, because if I started punching holes in the wall every time I got a rejection letter, it wouldn't go down well with me. I think persistence is a key, but also I think it's, why did you start writing in the first place? And if it's because you love books, but you also you have to be in love with the idea of being a writer, being an author and a novelist. And if you're not in love with that idea and it's just a passing fancy, then yes, you will give up after the first round of rejections. But I think most people who last the course and get published eventually, it's because they've never given up on that dream, no matter what other. My dream was not to be a management consultant. It was always to be a writer. And yes, it took me until the age of 40 to get published. But now, 12 years later and 12 books later. So, you can never say you've fulfilled every single ambition or dream, because there's always something new to write and something new to achieve. But it's a nice place to be after that long being rejected.
Interestingly, Chris, you mentioned the different genres that you wrote in, including the erotic sort of novel. Do you think that was to do with kind of your experience as a writer and growing, or perhaps timing? Because, for example, at the moment, erotic stories are kind of be the big trend. So do you think that was a case of just you were waiting for the right tough thing to hit to kind of think that's where you want to go with it, or was crime writing always your destiny, if that made sense?
No, not by any means. Like I said, I started off loving sci-fi. I wrote sci-fi short stories in longhand, and then I wrote that comic fantasy. I think largely it was because of a complete lack of knowledge, which is why podcasts like this are amazing now. When I was growing up, there was no internet. There was no way you could go online to see, erudite, good cop Chris and bad cop Chris and all this kind of stuff, and listen to writers. You couldn't even go and see any writers because they hardly did any touring. And I come from an Asian community where, almost no one read fiction. There were 600 people went to my sister's wedding. They had bloody bagpipers there, but I could count on one hand the number of people who read fiction. So there was no one for me to talk to. There was no courses for me to attend, no festivals to go to. So for the entire period of 20 odd years and 7 rejected novels, I literally showed nothing. I didn't show a single piece of writing to anyone else. And I think now when I look at that, and I think I could have shortcutted that process if I'd had the advice and the guidance, and instead of willy-nilly trying to write any old thing that I thought might sell in the market or just came into my head, I would have been a lot more focused about it.
Yeah. I suppose the question then is, how did you sort of harness your craft and sort of find your voice that eventually broke through to you becoming published? And what do you think the difference was between the novels you were writing before that and the one that actually launched your career?
Oh, that's relatively easy to answer, actually, because my earlier novels were shit. I mean, and genuinely speaking, I can go back and look at them, and I cringe. You know, a 17-year-old cannot really write a grown-up proper novel. It's just not possible. They think they can, right? And unless they're that one in a million genius, then they're completely completely deluded. And I was completely deluded. And I think it wasn't until I think if, I think, and this is quite odd because most agents are not such shite bags, but I got one person replying to me on that submission when I was 17 to say, we don't think you should ever write another word again, which is quite a cruel thing to say to a 17-year-old. It wasn't until my fourth book that I started to get positive feedback that, you know, we don't want this book, but we like your writing. The next thing you write, do send it to us. And I think those little tiny glimmers of encouragement were enough to keep me going. Sorry, what was the question? I've forgotten.
Just like, how did you find your voice that sort of then launched your career?
Yeah.
So
it comes back to write what you know. I'd written a lot of books where the protagonist was nothing like me or didn't lean into my background or experience. I was just trying to write what I thought the market wanted. I wrote one thriller, and this will make you laugh now, but at the time it made perfect sense to me. It was set in the American White House, where the president is kidnapped by aliens, and when he returns, he acts in a really bonkers way. And well, you can make it up now.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So it was the 10 years that I lived in India in my 20s, and I saw this amazing country change from the pre-industrial society to the near global superpower that we think of India as today. So globalization, westernization, all of that comes into the country. You've got skyscrapers and all the rest of it. And then you've got these crazy things like, you know, first when I landed and I walked out of the airport and we were in a taxi going to the hotel, we stopped at this set of traffic lights with this chaos in the road. And then this massive elephant with a man on its back comes walking through the traffic. And you can't see anything like that unless you've had a few too many on a Friday night in England. And so that stayed with me. And I think that experience went into that first book that was published, which is called The Unexpected Inheritance of Inspector Chopra. It's a mystery. It's set in modern Mumbai in India, what used to be Bombay. A policeman in his mid-40s, forced into early retirement, one last mission, one last job, trying to solve a murder. But he also inherits on his last day in office a baby elephant. And I never expected this book to be published. I mean, who puts an elephant into a bloody crime novel? But I just wanted to put in all of the amazing things I'd seen out there. And it turns out that that's what did it, because the book, I got an agent off the back of that book, and then the agent sold the first 4 books in that series to a Big 5 publisher. And I asked him afterwards, I said, why did you buy this book? And my editor said, it's because it was so completely different to anything we'd seen in the crime fiction market. Firstly, it was out in India, and there hadn't been many crime novels set in India. And then you had this policeman, this very serious man who takes justice very seriously in this turbulent modern India with sort of, you know, poverty and slums and all the rest of it. But you've also got this globalization and westernization. And then you've given him this baby elephant that he has to look after, and he lives on the 13th floor of a tower block. I mean, and they just said it was, they just fell in love with that idea. And they put me on BBC Breakfast to talk about it, which gave it a great start, translated into 17 languages. And effectively that book, it's changed my life. It gave me a career as a writer. I wrote 5 books in that series, and they continue. I haven't written a book in that series for about 6 years because I wanted to do something different, but they continue to sell, and people continue to write to me. And there's usually 2 questions. One is, when are you going to do another one? And the second question is more of a threat. Make sure nothing happens to that damned elephant. So.
It's incredible to think about. And there's a lot of people out there might feel they need to stick to what's already there to kind of fit in and to get a chance of being published, for example. And there's people out there that want to go wide with their stories, like kind of even further than what you've done. Is there a line they should go down, do you feel, or is it you just write what you feel like you should write, and that's true to your heart, and that's the way it should be?
Well, one thing I've become over the last 12 years is a student of the industry, of the publishing industry. And because I talk to people around the industry, I run a crime fiction podcast where I talk to people, famous writers and editors and the like. And what you quickly come to realize is that very few people know what the bloody hell they're doing. And a large part of what happens is luck, fortune, good fortune, or people taking a punt on something and not really knowing. I mean, Harry Potter was rejected by 28 agents? Can you imagine being an agent who's rejected a multi-billion-dollar franchise? You'd be bloody suicidal, wouldn't you? And so, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, sorry, I've forgotten the question again. What was it? It was
just about writing. Do you think the people out there that think they need to write directly to sort of what the industry looks like, or like yourself with the elephant going slightly sideways? Do you think there's a right way to approach that?
I think the industry. I think the best way to encapsulate it is do something completely different. But the same. And that sounds nonsensical, but what it really means is that when you have something like crime fiction, which has a template and certain beats that readers are expecting, then it's good to try and stick to that template and those beats. But what editors really are looking for is somebody who takes that formula and then just tweaks it enough so that they can go to the market and say, hey, if you loved Ian Rankin's Rebus series, here's another brilliant Scottish police procedural, but it does something slightly different. So that gets them that market of readers who already love Rebus, but hopefully it brings something new so that everyone doesn't roll their eyes and just say, oh, well, it's just a complete rip-off of Rebus. So I'm not going to claim to be completely unique. I mean, nobody else has put an elephant into a crime novel as a sidekick, but those books do lean into the kind of market that Alexander McCall Smith's Number One Ladies Detective Agency, although they're a bit darker, and Chopra is a more serious man. Do either of you read Ben Aranovic's Rivers of London?
Yes.
There's a perfect example of somebody who took a known formula and did something completely off the wall with it, and it's paid off.
Yeah, we had a great chat with Ben on the show. He was fantastic. While you're talking about uniqueness and the way you were discussing it just then, what I want to talk about is you're now taking on the Q series or a new series of Q through the Ian Fleming Estate. So when there's already sort of a history of that character, how do you approach about taking that in a similar way, like your own direction, without changing too much, but whilst also making it unique?
Yeah, so that project came about because they'd been reading some of my Malabar House novels, which is my 1950s India set historical series, and they were looking for something with a similarly dry tone. And Q is a very dry character, dryly humorous. And what they didn't want was another spy novel, because they've got people who write straight continuation novels of James Bond, right? What they wanted was to lean into this. So here's their pitch, that we want something halfway between Mick Herron's Slow Horses and Richard Osman's Thursday Murder Club.
Yes.
And we want Q to be the central protagonist, but we don't know what the story could be. So why don't you give us some ideas? And the idea that I gave them and they went with was Quantum of Menace, where Q is booted out of MI6. And as you said, he's the gadget master, or he thinks of himself as a real scientist. He's been there for a few decades, and he basically produces weapons and field kit for James Bond and the other 00 agents. Now he's booted out. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He's got no friends, got no family. He's age 50, so he's neither Desmond Llewellyn, neither is he Ben Whishaw, which sort of partly answers your question, because I did not want to use either of those, because people are so wedded to them that if I made a mess of it, I'd have legions of Bond fans parked outside my house lobbing bricks through my window. Didn't want that. And then he's at sea, and then he receives a cryptic letter from his childhood friend Peter Napier, who's a quantum computer scientist, hence the title, Quantum of Menace. And Peter's recently died under mysterious circumstances, and that letter pulls Q back to his small hometown to reinvestigate Peter's death. And he's not been back home for nearly 3 decades because he's left a very messy past behind. So the book is it's a small town murder mystery, but it's also it's an exploration of how Q reacts now that he's lost his job at MI6, and what is he going to do next with his life. And the hope, of course, is that he becomes a kind of an amateur detective in this small town, solving various murders as we move along the series.
It's a great kind of addition to have, the fact his background can assist him in that modern sort of journey. Did you lean on sort of what was already there a lot, or did you kind of think, I'm going to reinvent this completely in my sort of image?
Yeah, well, the great thing about Q is that he doesn't appear in the books very much at all. You know, he starts life as a Major Boothroyd, as an armorer in the 6th book, I think, or 5th, Dr. No. And he's the one who gives Bond his Walther PPK when Bond was previously using a Beretta. And then he sort of vanishes, and then we get to see him on film, and he becomes Q. And so the two become sort of joined together, and you know, it becomes a Q that we know. But even in the films, you know, he's usually just a few minutes of things exploding in the lab, and then he gives Bond something and gives him a dry put down, like "pay attention, Bond" or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I had plenty to work with. I've given him a whole. I made him into a proper character, a man who, as I said, takes his work very seriously, because he believes in a vision, and he and James Bond believe in a vision of democracy and a way of life that we all hopefully sign up to in Western countries. And he's helped to try and protect that way of life, as has James Bond. And we sometimes lose that in the films because they're sort of action movies. And I've tried to bring that sense back into the book. So he leans into that part of his past, and we get lots of Easter eggs for Bond fans, and James Bond, Commander James Bond, does make a meaningful appearance in the second half of the book. So yeah, it's a balancing act, you know, how much of the old Q to include, and how much do we want the new Q who is actually out there solving this mystery. I've had an enormous amount of fun with it, and people seem to be enjoying it, the ones who've read it.
The one question that it didn't fit in with what I was planning to ask, and I wanted to ask it, which was if it has the potential as it stands, you know, just the fact of what it is, to have a series or potentially a movie made of it. If that was the case, would you have any idea who you would love to have as the classic James Bond / Q theme song, to perform the theme song? Haven't
Oasis just been signed up to do? I'm sure I heard it on the news yesterday. Oasis have just been signed up to do the theme song for the new, or have been requested to do the theme song for the new Bond.
I'm slightly disappointed by that, to be honest.
You're not an Oasis fan?
I am not, no. Chris,
Cop?
what about you? I think you strike me as someone who would like that.
Oh, thanks. Stereotyping much.
No. They're from Manchester.
It depends what they do with it, to be honest. There's been a couple of really good. I mean, I didn't think Adele would do a great Bond song, but I think, you know, Skyfall was a really good one. So I think it just depends on the mood of the film and if they can sort of get that right.
Yeah, I don't know who. Britney Spears. Yeah, that's who it's got to be, right? Britney Spears doing a Bond song.
Well, we've had Sam Smith, we've had Billie Eilish, we've had who you just mentioned. I don't know, Oasis.
I tell you who it should be. I tell you, a fellow thriller writer. Yeah,
Mark Billingham's band.
No, 50 Cent, Curtis Jackson.
Oh yeah.
Did you know that he writes thrillers?
Yeah.
I only discovered this the other day. Well,
yeah,
he's got his hands in everything at the minute. He makes documentaries. Yeah. He writes crime novels.
Yeah. I'm not sure that he actually wrote a single word of those books, because the actual writer's name is on there as well in very, very tiny microscopic font.
He maybe said the idea to the writer.
Yeah. Maybe.
We don't know.
He might have dreamed it once while he was.
Amazing.
So, Vaseem, obviously, with your books being produced in 17 different countries and the success that you've had, obviously with your roles as well that you've had over the time, does that add any additional pressure to you when you sit down and write because obviously you said you wrote, 7 books before you got published, which should imagine that was you just driving yourself forward. But then when you've got an army of people waiting for things to happen, waiting for the next story, the next idea, does that add additional pressure to you? And how do you cope with that and sort of manage the writing?
Well, I mean, look, when you're under a publishing contract, or 2 of them as I am at the moment, there is that deadline pressure. There is that knowledge that once you submit something, you're going to get an editor or more than one editor tearing things apart and helping you. I mean, that's tearing things apart is the wrong way to look at it. They're there to help you make a better book, and that pressure is not there when you're not published. But in terms of actually sitting down and enjoying the process of writing, there's nothing better, except maybe making a 15 playing cricket when I'm playing cricket. But and this is something I know that everybody who's listening today will recognize, that when you've got an idea that really excites you, and you've got characters that you've invented and you love their company, and you're sitting down and you're flying, the plot's making sense, everything's working. It's just a wonderful, amazing feeling. And whenever things go wrong, I always try and go back to that and say, look, you didn't start off this whole thing when you were a teenager trying to be a writer because you thought you were going to be famous and rich and all the rest of it. You did it because of how much joy and pleasure it gave you to sit down and write. And I think whenever I do workshops or whatever, that's the first thing I say to people. I say, if you're not feeling that joy, that means that either you're not writing the right book, or you're just not, this is not for you. Writing is not for you. You've got to feel that joy to do it. And that doesn't go away no matter how many publishing deals you have or whatever.
And if we try and break down the stigma a little bit, because we have a lot of people who watch the show that are aspiring writers, and I think it's really helpful to go into like what the actual day-to-day looks like and what success is on a daily basis for different people. So could you sort of like take us through a typical day in your life in terms of like what you're aiming to achieve that day and things like that?
Sure. But I will say this for people who are aspiring writers. So one of my favorite writers is a chap called John Irving, who writes these big meaty literary books like The Cider House Rules and those kind of books. And I read something when I was still struggling to try and get published. I read something by him which I found really inspirational, because he'd written that when he was still struggling to get published, he went to a talk by one of his favorite writers, and he spoke to this guy afterwards, and he was in awe of him, and he said to him, "Look, I'm trying to be a writer, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong." And the guy pulled him up, and he said to him, "Look, first things first is each day you've got to stop saying that you're trying to be a writer. If you're writing in any form, it means you are a writer. And it doesn't matter if you haven't yet got a publishing deal or whatever. You are a writer because you've taken the effort to make that first step in the journey, and you've taken the effort to keep going. So never believe that you're not a writer just because you haven't got that publishing deal yet." So my process is that I plan a lot. I'm not a pantser. I'm a dedicated plotter. I spend 2 or 3 months creating a plot. I was a management consultant, so I use spreadsheets. I'll have one row for each of the scenes in the book. I'll do the research and I'll hone it. And then I'll have this great big spreadsheet that has every scene, a little basic plot for every scene. Then I start writing. I'll get up very early in the morning, 6, 7. I'll write 1,000 words, 1,500 words, and then I'll stop, and then I'll reread them, and then I'll try and edit. And I like to edit as I go because I absolutely hate getting edits from my editor afterwards. So I try and make it. And I hate doing the whole just dump a first draft and then go back, because I find that that's for me it doesn't work, because it means I have to go and change so much. I'd much rather go change as I go, and also as I change as I go, it means that new ideas will occur to me because I'm going slightly slower than if I just tried to dump an entire 100,000 words in 2 months. And then once I'm done, I leave it for a few weeks, and then I come back to it, reread, edit, reread, do that 2 or 3 times, and then I'll send it in.
Oh, nice.
I noticed that reference there, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of my students that if somebody says 6, 7 and you didn't do that, then
My
you must-
daughter will laugh at that. I will show her this, and she will find that hysterical.
Sorry, what would they laugh at? Getting up early in the morning.
No, Chris is this crazy weird trend that makes no sense. It's called 6-7, and Chris did some weird symbol that the kids like to do.
Yeah. Well, I know where I was listening to it on the radio the other day. It comes from an American basketball player who.
Oh yeah.
And it's just gone bonkers, hasn't it?
It really has. So I want to talk about, just because this is kind of jumbled up in the way we've talked about things in a great way, The Edge of Darkness being the 6th and final book in the Malabar House series.
Well, it's news to me that it's the final book because I'm halfway through the 7th one.
Well, my information is absolutely horrendous right now.
You know my editor. It's just something she hasn't told me.
Inside scoop, it is now finished. There is no 7th book. That is a lie. No, of course not. So ignore that. How many books do you have planned in the series? That would be a better question for me to ask.
So that series does really well. So it's entirely up to the publisher. They keep renewing it, and I love writing them. So I should probably give some background. So after I did 5 books in that first series with the policeman and the baby elephant, the Baby Ganesh series, I wanted to do something where I looked at where this modern India came from. Because it's my heritage, but I didn't know anything about it until I went there aged 23. Now, all I'd ever known about it before was what I'd seen in Bollywood films. And if you've ever seen one of these things, you know that they bear no relationship to reality whatsoever.
They are fantastic.
So I learned about the history of India, and I thought, you know what? I want to write about this, but I want to write about that time just after India became independent, because Britain had been there for about 300 years and they completely changed the trajectory of the country. But we don't really understand it that well because we don't teach it in history here. And history and English were my favorite subjects at school, but we never learn. I love learning about Tudor England and I love learning about the World Wars, but it would have been nice to learn a little bit about Britain's time in India. So I picked 1950, just after India becomes independent. I introduced India's first female police detective. She's working with an English forensic scientist who's out there trying to help the Bombay force set up its own forensic science lab. And in the first book, it's called Midnight at Malabar House. An English diplomat is murdered in Bombay, as Mumbai was then known, and the case falls into their lap. And because she's the only woman on the police force in India, they don't know what to do with her, so they shove her into Bombay's smallest police station with all the rejects and misfits. And so she's trying to prove herself while she's trying to solve this murder. And I didn't know if the book would be successful, but you know, it really took off, and we're up to 6 in the series now. The Edge of Darkness, which you referenced, which comes out in January, and this time she's been banished to the northeastern jungles of India, where she's working in this small police station in a place called the Naga Hills, which is now Nagaland. And that area is famous because the local tribes there, up until the 1960s, were still chopping off each other's heads. Wow. She's staying in a colonial hotel, and she's called up to the room of the state governor, and it's locked. And they break in and they discover his body, and the head is missing. And so we have a locked room mystery. We have a missing head, and there's an insurgency going on. So it's all of that lovely politics and history all mixed up with a proper locked room mystery. So lots of fun for me to write.
Yeah. Were there any inspirational characters to sort of motivate you to write Persis?
Yeah, I mean, there was, so when you look at the history of that period, sort of women didn't really have much of a voice. It's a very patriarchal society, a lot of misogyny in the police force. But there were some women, when I did the research, that were really sort of going against the trend. And there was one really amazing woman. She married into a family of pilots. And then her father-in-law saw that she liked this. And so he trained her. And then he took her to an airfield in Bombay, and he said, if you can, so the story goes, I don't know if he actually said it, but the story goes, he said, if you can take this plane up, it was a little gypsy moth, if you can take this plane up and bring it down without crashing, I'll give you a pilot's license. Apparently she did. And there's this amazing picture, if you Google her name, Surya Takral, of this woman in a sari, an Indian sari, with a big old style aviator cap on her head, standing next to this gypsy moth. So she's one of India's first female pilots. So she's kind of an inspiration.
Love that. So with the lock room thriller then, like we've had a lot of guests come on the show and talk about sort of how they construct a lock room thriller. But what advice would you give to somebody if they were attempting it for the first time? Because it can be quite tricky.
Yeah, it is tricky. And the first thing to do is, of course, to read, do a bit of Googling, find the books that have really done this well. Probably not the ones that are really old from the golden age era, because they use certain tricks that today readers would just roll their eyes at. But even in the last decade or so, Mike Craven, who you've probably had on, or he's done one, and there's a few other people. And that's one thing. And the second thing is, of course, that don't be afraid to take a little bit of liberty, because a locked room mystery, no matter how you do it, I mean, I don't know if you guys are fans of Death in Paradise, but I think Death in Paradise did an entire season of locked room mysteries, and some of them you get to the end and you'd want to smash your TV because you think this is nonsense, but you love the show, so you keep watching. So you can take a bit of liberty with those.
Halo has put a comment in saying, "Is that where the Naga myth comes from?" Referencing slightly earlier.
I'm not sure what Halo means by the Naga myth.
Yeah, let us know, Halo, if you can. Just to jump in there, I've found that picture. So unlucky if you're on the podcast listening, sorry you can't see this, but is that the image you're talking about?
That's the one. Yeah, she goes. Yeah. Look at that. Yeah.
Well, give it a go. It's just a plane. I'm sure there's loads of health and safety violations. But yeah, I guess back then it was all about dreams, and well done if that was a real story, because amazing. So we are flying through this, and the rounds have kind of jumbled up. So we're kind of in the time where you guys can ask questions. So if you do have questions, please send them in, and we will ask them around our staple questions. So Chris, do you want to start us off with those?
Yeah, so the first staple question that we have is, if you could take any character from fiction and make that character your own, which character would you choose and what would you do with them?
Right. Okay. So I thought about this, and I always thought, because I love fantasy and sci-fi, as I've told you, and I loved Lord of the Rings, and I read it earlier, and I always thought poor old Sauron got a bad deal. He's always painted as this villain, and yes, he's a bit villainous, and he kills loads of people. But he's backed into a corner. He's got no option but to take over Middle Earth, because they just won't let him do what he wants to do. So I'd love to get Sauron out of Middle Earth, put him into a crime novel. Put him into a crime novel as a sidekick. And I think he'd be a really good sidekick. You can imagine a Sherlock Holmes style detective saying, "Oh, it's elementary, my dear Sauron." And Sauron would be quite an intimidating kind of sidekick, right? You wouldn't want to mess with Sauron, get yourself laser-eyed to death. So I'd love to do something sympathetic.
Well, there could be a really interesting backstory as how he is where he is.
I think was it Amazon possibly or Netflix? There is a series which looks at Sauron's background and leads us through how he started off nice and then became a bit nasty. But I watched that and I thought to myself, yeah, this isn't fair. They're just painting him as a bad guy. Yeah, so what if he kills a few hobbits here and there? Probably like the bloody hobbits anyway.
I saw a brilliant video of somebody yesterday who has recreated their own Sauron, and they've done it entirely out of metal and made the whole suit of armor and everything. And the guy actually has a heart attack and nearly died because the head was on strings and one of the strings snaps and Sauron's head moves.
Oh no.
But when he was working on the arm, the head just moved and it looked really menacing. And obviously he wasn't expecting it to move. So the next bit of video is him just like sort of collapsing down.
This reminds me of an event I did years ago when a person came in with their teenage daughter, and she'd made this papier mâché elephant because she'd been reading my first series, right? Yeah. And I thought, oh, this is amazing, thank you so much. And then she said, no, you can't have it. I just bought it, bought it in for you to sign. So can you sign it? And I'm taking it back. Was it one of your students, Chris? It's bad Chris's students, wasn't it?
Yeah, quite possibly.
That's
brilliant. I love the fact that people are bringing, you know, fan-made work for you to sign and everything. That'll be in somebody's room. It's a little treasured piece, but yeah, it's brilliant.
Or on eBay. Depending on how they are motivated. Halo said, referencing the question earlier, sorry, the half human, half cobra myth.
Oh no, that's something different. So the Nagas are just they're tribals in that particular area. What you're talking about is from Hindu mythology. And the Nagas are largely Christian because the Brits and the Americans converted them to Christianity.
As that happened often. So let's we'll carry on with the staple questions. So if you could take any character from the world of fiction, this being a TV show, a movie, or a novel or a series, and put that character into maybe a book of your own, or even if you can't think of that, take them out for the day, what character from the world of fiction would you do that with?
Oh, I thought we just did that with Sauron, didn't we?
Sorry. Apologies. Okay, if you could take the ending of anything, again, to those same sort of categories and change the ending, what ending would you change and why?
Oh, I tell you what, the movie Seven, right?
Ooh.
Brad Pitt. And because the studio bosses so for those who don't know, Seven is a serial killer movie with Kevin Spacey as a serial killer, and it's got this hideous ending where
Top notch.
Yeah, right. I don't want to spoil it completely for people. I might have to actually because
it's been out so long. I haven't seen
the ending is that Brad Pitt's wife, the serial killer, cuts off her head, sticks it in a box, calls Brad Pitt to this location, and he says, "Here's the box." And Brad doesn't know what's in the box until he opens it, and then of course he kills the serial killer, which is what the serial killer wants. And I always thought to myself, the studio bosses didn't like that ending to begin with. And I always think to myself, what the hell did they want then? So imagine if in the box, instead of the head, there's a cake or a small, lovely pet dog for Brad Pitt. And completely changes what we think of Kevin Spacey. Oh, yes, he murdered a few other people, but he gave Brad Pitt a lovely pet dog.
But it's what completed the whole Seven Sin saga.
I know. But that's the ending that always stays with me as just an amazing, brilliant ending. So if you want to mess with someone's ending, there's an ending to mess with.
Just the way he turns and says, "Oh, he didn't know." It's like, yeah. It's one of my favorite films, and I don't think it's ever been replicated to that sort of level of awesomeness since, unless someone knows. Yeah,
or maybe it's a bigger box and somebody leaps out, like Tony Blair leaps out.
What's the Punk'd show back in the day? Punk'd.
Oh, I don't remember watching.
No, just like a big prank show and they jump out with the cameras. That would have been quite funny.
Vaseem, I was just going to sidetrack a little bit there in terms of endings then. Like, obviously, you've talked about being such a detailed planner, but how do you know when you've got a really good ending?
Well, I mean, so with crime fiction, you usually want to set up 3 or 4 different suspects, right? Unless it's a thriller, which operates in a slightly different way. And I've written one of those as well, so it's slightly different. But you want to be able to lead the reader down a garden path in 3 or 4 different directions, but any of them, make sense with the eventual ending. So if you get to the ending and the killer is revealed, and then the reader goes back and says, "But wait a minute, the groundwork wasn't laid for this person to be the killer. This is just bonkers." Then I think readers will be disappointed. So if you've done your job properly, any of 3 or 4, maybe 5 people could be the killer. But hopefully it will be someone who is very surprising. But when the reader goes back and say, "Oh, wait a minute, that person did make a tiny appearance over here early in the book, and then we didn't really see them again. And yes, I can understand the logic now as to why they were the killer."
Yeah, I love that. And one of our sort of staple questions is, again, a little bit morbid, but you're on your deathbed, you're looking back at your writing career. What would you be happy with? What is success to you?
Jesus Christ, he's ended one of my series and you've put me on my deathbed. Given that I've just had my blood test done, I'm not sure how far away from the truth this is. I've got high cholesterol now, so basically my wife has banned me from eating anything that tastes remotely good. Anyway, what does success look like? Well, success looks like George Clooney, doesn't it? I mean, what a smug bastard. He's, not only is he a top movie actor, not only has he got his own, where's my bloody coffee adverts, but he's also made $1 billion out of his whiskey firm or whatever it is, rum or whatever. Okay, I mean, I said this a little bit earlier, didn't I? No matter how many books you sell or how established you become, ultimately, for me, success is always going to be being able to come up with a great idea for a book and then to have an enormous amount of fun writing that book, regardless of whether or not it's going to be published. And even now, because I read so widely across so many genres, and even now I occasionally will sit down and I will start writing something different, not under a publishing contract. I wrote like 10,000 words of a fantasy when I in between contracted books this year, just because I wanted to write something different. Yeah, it'd probably take me 10 years to finish the damn thing because I have to wait for gaps in my writing schedule. But I do 5 or 6 short stories every year in different genres, because just for the pleasure of writing something that's different. So for me, I think success really is A, that, and B, the whole community of friends that I've made, now including you two, because I never expected to make those friends at this age. You know, I got to 40, I'd never been published, didn't think after 100 odd rejections that I would ever get published. Once I was published, did not know what kind of reception might await me in the industry, because, you know, if I'm being completely honest, 12 years ago there were almost no writers of my heritage in crime fiction, and everywhere I went and everyone I saw and talked to was a white person, and I didn't know what they would make of someone like me coming in and writing crime novels set in India. But people have been so wonderful and so lovely. It's just been an amazing experience, and I know it's not everyone's experience, but I did spend 20 years in the trenches. So now I feel that a large part of the joy I get out of this industry is things like this, you know, making friends, meeting people, talking to readers and other aspiring writers. That's success.
Yeah, I love that. That's one of the best answers we've had, I think, to that question.
I was about to say exactly the same thing. That's genuine and humble and amazing. So yeah, thank you for that answer. We do have a couple of questions in there. Let me find them. Anya says, ideal place and last ideal place. Maybe that's least ideal, I'm not entirely sure, for a writing retreat.
Well, I tend to get out very quickly playing cricket, and then I've got the whole rest of the day to sit on the sideline. So I tend to take my laptop and I tend to get a bit of writing done on a cricket pitch. But look, ideally for me, it's a very quiet space. I don't understand writers. Maybe you're one of these people who, you know, put on rock and roll music when they're. And I have friends who do this. I just can't understand how that dynamic works. So least ideal is a noisy, crowded cafe. I find that very difficult to write in those places.
Yeah, I think music-wise, it affects my emotions too much. I'm not sure how many other people are like this. It has to be very calm and almost non-noticeable for it to work well. Chris says, who would you have playing as your Q character in a film or TV adaptation?
Oh, it's got to be Tom Cruise, right? I mean, if he can play Jack Reachers, who's like 6 foot taller than him,
Wow.
I mean, he can definitely play. I mean, I love Tom Cruise. I think he's an amazing actor, great range, and he was brilliant in Collateral, where he dyed his hair grey. So maybe we could have that Tom Cruise playing Q.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. That was great. Yes, we might have time for one or two more things, but Vaseem, before we do wrap this up, because our time is now coming to an end, where can people find you on social medias? Where can they buy your books, and can you point them towards all the things you'd like them to look at?
Well, if you just Google my name, you'll see my website, and all my books are up there. My social, I'm on most of social media, Instagram and Twitter or X or whatever the hell they call it these days, and Facebook. So I'm fairly easy to find. And, you know, anyone who wants to read one of my books, I'll be very grateful. The Quantum of Menace does look very Christmassy, I have to say. I think they deliberately gave it the Christmas colors.
Yeah, I do love the cover for your 6th book, not the final book in the series.
Yeah,
that cover seems very different to the others. Did you have much input on that one?
I did. They asked me, and for that one, I said, "Look, the Nagas are known for headhunting, so maybe a skull."
It's great.
And then there's a picture of an actual Naga hut, so they have a very distinctive hut. So yeah, it's a great cover. I didn't do it myself. They have an in-house designer at Hodder who does that. He's done an amazing job with all the series.
So just before we go then, can you shed the spotlight on a writer that you think maybe hasn't had enough credit for the stuff they've been doing? And who would they be, and what should we check out from them?
Well, you mentioned a friend of yours earlier, didn't you, Rob Parker? And his latest series with the SAS equivalent of a diver. I've forgotten the exact terminology they use for it. I thought that was brilliant. The Trouble Deep, I think it was called, wasn't it? The first in that series, and I know he's busy beavering away on a second one in that series. So it's a real change for Rob, and I think he's just done a terrific. I love that book, so I think I think why not give a friend a pat on the back there for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm going to push one more in there just to keep you a bit longer. For everyone that may be watching that or listening as aspiring writers, what is the single most important piece of writing advice you can give them today?
Well, that's an easy one because I say this in my workshops, and it's a very concrete piece of advice. The number one reason that books are rejected by agents is because the quality of the book does not meet their minimum standard for them to be able to have confidence sending it out to a publisher. And what I mean by that is that people probably haven't spent enough time learning the craft of the type of prose, plotting, and characterization needed for the genre of book they're trying to write. And it differs. If you're trying to write a literary novel, the prose standard is required is slightly higher. When you're trying to write crime fiction, it's more about the prose isn't necessarily so important, as we know from books like The Da Vinci Code, which I absolutely love, but nobody's going to call it a literary masterpiece. It's more about, are you getting the beats right? Is the hook amazing? Are the characters going to stand up if it's a character-driven crime novel? Or if it's a plot-driven one, does the plot stand up? So you've got to get feedback. You've got to, and often I will say to people that if you have good friends who are willing to read and who are knowledgeable about this, use them. But better to get an editor who's experienced and pay them, because there are some of these helpful agencies out there now. Now, just be careful to pick one where you've read the biography of the editor and they really have had experience in the industry and can be trusted. And it's not one of these fly-by-night merchants. But you normally get one good chance with a good idea. What you don't want is to send it to 20 agents, a brilliant hook that's been badly executed, and then you ruin your chance with that particular book, and then you have to go and write something else. Make the best fist of it before you submit.
Amazing. Yeah, that is absolutely fantastic advice, and thank you so much. Vaseem, you've been amazing to chat to. As I said, it was a shame that the amount of times we've been to Harrogate, we haven't quite had that conversation, but now we've had that. So it's amazing to do that, and thank you so much. And Chris, have you got any questions, Bad Cop, before we wrap this up?
Oh, I'm just going to say good luck following England for however many games they've got left. And yeah.
I'll be up at 5 a.m. again tonight. So let's hope that we have a better day than yesterday. But guys, it's been absolutely wonderful chatting to you. And thank you so much for all of the support you give to writers with your podcast. And if you're at Harrogate this year, I will see you there.
You shall indeed. Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. If you're watching it back or listening, thank you for doing that as well. Please do leave some comments and follow Vaseem on his socials. And of course, buy his latest books. And you can find them on his website and on Amazon and your local bookstore, I'm assuming, as well.
Yeah, it's in all the bookstores. Yeah.
Excellent. So there you go. Go and pick those books up this weekend, because it's raining in the UK, so you may as well read a book. But from us, it's goodbye. Have a great weekend. And thank you very much for watching. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, guys.